I never intended to move into that old house at the edge of town, but when the price was right, I didn't question it much. It was a quiet neighborhood with neat lawns and tidy streets. But there was something about that particular house that made me uneasy from day one. The faded paint and shuttered windows gave it a look that whispered stories no one wanted to hear. The first time I met my neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, she was watering her roses and glanced at the house with a knowing look. "That place belonged to a man who kept to himself," she said quietly, as if revealing a secret. "Old Henry. Haven't seen him in decades. Just vanished one day, without a trace." Her voice dropped, and the smile she tried to force seemed strained. I asked her what happened, hoping for some local lore or ghost story, but she just shook her head. "No one really knows. He lived alone, didn't socialize much. The kind of guy who disappeared and left no goodbye." Her eyes flicked back toward the house, and I suddenly felt the air grow colder, though it was a warm afternoon. That night, lying in bed, I found myself thinking about Henry and the silence that seemed to cling to the house. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful but heavy, like a weight pressing down on your chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, but sleep didn't come easy. Every creak and groan of the old house sounded louder in the dark. In the following days, I started noticing little things. Footprints in the dust on the porch that weren't mine. The faint smell of something musty that vanished when I tried to find the source. The neighbors didn't talk much about the house, and when I tried to bring it up, conversations would abruptly change. It felt like they wanted to protect me from something. One evening, I found an old newspaper clipping stuck in the mail slot. The headline was barely readable but mentioned Henry's disappearance and a brief police search that went cold. There was no mention of foul play or any leads, just the simple fact that he vanished, leaving the house untouched. I folded the paper carefully, realizing I was now part of a story that no one dared finish. Days turned into weeks, and the house began to feel less like a home and more like a trap. The atmosphere inside was thick with unease. I would catch glimpses of shadows moving just beyond my vision and hear soft footsteps when I was alone. Friends who came to visit mentioned the cold spots and how the house gave them the creeps, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just tired. One night I woke up to the sound of the front door creaking open. Heart pounding, I got up to check, but the porch was empty. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the fresh rain. Yet I knew someone, or something, had been there. The feeling of being watched settled deep into my bones, and I realized that whatever had taken Henry might still be lingering. I began to question my own sanity, but the house didn't care. It waited silently, its secrets buried deep beneath layers of dust and neglect. And I was starting to understand that some disappearances aren't about people leaving, they're about being taken, swallowed by the silence that lives inside these walls. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, the isolation, the stress of moving, maybe even exhaustion. But then I found the old journal. It was tucked behind a loose brick in the basement wall, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was shaky, but the words told a story of loneliness and fear that felt too real to ignore. Henry wrote about hearing footsteps in the hall at night, about voices whispering just beyond his door. He described shadows that moved without source, and a creeping sense of dread that made the house feel alive. The last entry was incomplete, ending with a desperate note. "They're coming. I don't know how much longer I can hide." Reading it sent a chill through me. This wasn't just a house with a missing owner anymore. It was a place that held something that preyed on those who stayed too long. I felt trapped between wanting to leave and an odd, compelling urge to uncover what had truly happened to Henry. The nights grew worse. I could hear the whispers now, low murmurs curling through the vents like smoke. Sometimes they sounded like my own name, barely audible, just on the edge of hearing. Sleep was a stranger, and the daylight hours felt hollow, as if the house drained my energy and left me hollow inside. One morning I noticed fresh scratches on the wooden floor near the basement door, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. They looked like they were made by desperate hands clawing to escape. The realization hit me hard. Henry's fear wasn't just paranoia. Whatever haunted this place was still here, still desperate. I tried talking to the neighbors again, but their answers were cold and clipped. They warned me off, telling me to leave before the house took hold of me too. Their eyes held a fear I hadn't seen before, fear that went deeper than superstition. For the first time, I understood I was dealing with something real, something dangerous. The final straw came one evening when I heard pounding from the basement. I had avoided going down there, but the noise was relentless, like someone trapped beneath the floorboards. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. The basement was freezing cold, and the beam of light caught the glint of something metallic in the corner. It was an old, rusted box, sealed tight with a heavy lock. As I reached for it, the pounding stopped. A suffocating silence fell, thick and oppressive, and I felt eyes on me, watching, waiting. I knew then that the house wasn't just a building. It was a prison, holding secrets darker than I could have imagined. I had to decide, stay and uncover the truth, or leave before the same fate as Henry swallowed me whole. I hesitated, fingers trembling as I touched the cold metal of the box. It felt heavier than it should, as if holding more than just rusted relics. My mind raced, picturing what Henry might have locked away. Was it evidence, a confession, or something far worse that explained his disappearance? The air around me thickened, suffocating yet silent. Summoning my courage, I pried the box open with a screwdriver I found nearby. Inside were old letters, photographs, and a small, intricately carved wooden figure. The letters detailed Henry's growing paranoia, his fear that something was watching him from the shadows. The figure, however, unsettled me most, a twisted shape that seemed almost alive, as if it could move if I blinked. Suddenly, the basement lights flickered, and the air grew icy cold. A whisper brushed past my ear, a sound so faint I wasn't sure if I imagined it. I knew then that I wasn't alone. The house, or whatever haunted it, was warning me. The fear Henry wrote about was real, and now it was mine too. I slammed the box shut, my heart pounding. That night, sleep escaped me completely. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified, each shadow stretching longer than it should. I sat by the window, watching the moonlight paint the yard in cold silver, trying to convince myself this was just a nightmare I could wake from. But the truth was impossible to ignore. I wasn't just living in Henry's old house. I was living in his fear, his prison. The silence that once whispered secrets now screamed in my ears. I understood why he vanished, because some places don't want to be lived in, only inhabited by shadows. Morning brought no relief. The neighborhood felt different, as if the house's darkness had spilled beyond its walls. Mrs. Reynolds avoided my gaze, and the other neighbors hurried past without a word. I was trapped in a story that no one dared finish, a chilling memory I couldn't escape. I packed my bags that day, ready to leave the house and the mystery behind. But as I stepped outside, I glanced back and saw a figure standing silently in the window, a pale silhouette that vanished when I blinked. It wasn't Henry. It was something else, something that waited patiently for the next visitor. I never went back. The house remains there, quiet and still, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and silence. But sometimes, when the night is especially still, I swear I can hear the faintest whisper of a warning carried on the wind, reminding me that some stories don't end with closure, only questions. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. This happened a few years ago, right after my girlfriend Sarah and I moved into a quiet house outside Seattle. We were both excited. New place, fresh start, but something about the house felt tired, like it had seen too many things and decided to give up keeping them secret. The weirdest part is, we ignored all the signs because we didn't want to admit we were already falling apart. It started with little things, missed conversations, quiet dinners, her cold replies. We chalked it up to stress from the move, but looking back, I think the house was waiting for us to drift far enough apart that it could slip in unnoticed. The more we pretended everything was fine, the worse the air felt, like something thick was moving just under the surface. One morning, I found a crumpled note in Sarah's handwriting near the kitchen sink. It read, "It's feeding on us." I asked her about it, but she acted like it didn't exist. That's when I knew something had shifted, not just between us, but inside the house itself. It was like the walls were learning from us, or waiting. At first I told myself I was just overthinking it. We'd had rough patches before, and maybe this was just one of those. But the longer we stayed, the stranger things got. The lights dimmed randomly. The sound of creaking steps echoed when no one was upstairs. I caught her staring at a blank wall one evening like she was listening to something. I asked what she was doing, and she snapped, "Nothing," then left the room. She wasn't like that before. It was like something in the house was pulling her further away from me, and she didn't even notice. The bedroom became impossible to sleep in. The temperature was always off, freezing cold, even with the heater running. The walls seemed to press in during the night. One time I heard whispering near the closet like someone was breathing words into the dark, but no one was there. We didn't talk about the note again. We didn't talk about much at all anymore. We'd go entire evenings without saying a word, sitting in the same room, but miles apart. And the silence didn't feel natural. It felt watched, like it had weight to it. One night, I looked in the hallway mirror and saw both of us standing there, me in front, Sarah behind me. But there was something else behind her. It was gone the second I turned. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't a trick of the light. I asked her if she'd ever felt like the house was changing. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, "No, it's just you." Her voice was calm, but her eyes looked like she hadn't slept in days. I realized then, I wasn't sure which one of us was really slipping away. I started waking up at exactly 3:13 a.m. every night. No sound, no reason, just a jolt of awareness, like something unseen was standing right beside the bed. I never saw anything, but the feeling was thick, heavy. Sarah would still be asleep, or at least she pretended to be. I tried sleeping in the guest room one night just to shake the feeling. The bed was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and the shadows felt off. I woke up to the door wide open, even though I'd shut and locked it. Nothing in the house ever stayed where we left it. Sarah had gotten quieter too, like something had drained the edge from her voice. She didn't even seem scared, just hollow. Sometimes I'd catch her whispering to herself in the kitchen, facing the corner. I wanted to say something, but I was scared of what she'd say back. I tried calling her sister one day just to talk, just to make sure someone else remembered who Sarah used to be. But the call wouldn't go through. Every number I dialed just gave me static. My phone worked fine outside the house. Inside, it was like the place swallowed the signal. That same afternoon I came home from the store and the front door was unlocked. Sarah was inside, sitting on the floor in the hallway, staring at a burnt-out light bulb. "It's brighter when it's dead," she said softly, like she wasn't even talking to me. I left the groceries in the car and didn't go back inside for an hour. I started hearing knocks at the walls, not the front door, not the windows, just inside the walls, rhythmic, measured. It wasn't animals, it wasn't the pipes. It was like the house was trying to tap its way into our heads. I couldn't tell if Sarah noticed or had just accepted it. There was one night where I almost left. I had my keys, wallet, everything in hand. Sarah stopped me at the door. She didn't look angry. She looked confused, like I was breaking a rule neither of us remembered making. "We can't leave," she said. "It needs us to stay." I didn't sleep that night. The whispering came back, clearer now, like it was coming from beneath the floorboards. I placed my ear to the ground and heard my name. Not Sarah's, just mine. Repeated slowly, patiently, like something was waiting for me to finally respond. The next morning, Sarah asked me how long we'd been here. I said 6 months. She looked at me blank. "No, I mean before," she said. I told her there wasn't a before. This was our first home together. She looked down and whispered, "Then why do I remember being here alone?" I started marking the days on a calendar to keep track of time, a red line for every night I woke up at 3:13. By the third week, I noticed the lines curved slightly, forming an arc instead of a column. The ink had started bleeding into the page on its own. Sarah stopped going outside completely. The curtain stayed shut even during the day. I once caught her turning all the clocks backward, slowly, carefully, as if she was trying to undo something. I didn't stop her. Honestly, I wanted to see if it worked. The house creaked in a new way now. It wasn't the wood settling. It was like breathing, soft and deliberate. I placed a glass of water on the kitchen table and watched it ripple, even when everything else was still. That night, I moved a chair against the bedroom door. Sarah began saying things in her sleep. Not nightmares, statements. One night, she whispered, "It feeds better when we lie." I stayed awake after that, watching her chest rise and fall, wondering if something else was breathing beneath her skin. She didn't sound like herself anymore. I confronted her the next morning. I asked her what she meant. She stared at me, confused, like she had no memory of ever sleeping. But then she said something that froze me. "It told me you'd ask that." She smiled, but only with her mouth. I stopped recognizing the house in small ways. A hallway I didn't remember having. A light switch that wasn't there before. The basement door had vanished. Just smooth wall now, like it never existed. I started to feel like the house had swallowed parts of itself to keep us guessing. Then came the final night. I woke up not in bed, but on the living room floor, facing the corner. Sarah was standing above me, arms at her sides. "You finally came back," she whispered. But I had no memory of leaving. I didn't even know what day it was. The lights had all gone out, but the rooms were still lit, dimly, like by something internal. The walls felt soft, almost like skin. Sarah took my hand and led me down the hall, but the hallway didn't end. It just looped, turning in on itself. We passed our own bedroom 5 times, but each time it looked slightly different. One version had no bed. One had only mirrors. One had a photo of us, but our faces were blank. Sarah didn't notice. She kept walking like everything was fine. I tried letting go of her hand, but I couldn't move. It wasn't fear. It was like I no longer remembered how to turn around. She finally looked at me, her voice flat. "We denied it for too long. Now it's real." Behind her, the walls began to pulse. The last thing I remember was her eyes, glassy, distant, almost relieved. She said, "If we admit it now, it starves." I think I smiled because I didn't want it to starve. I think part of me had always known we were feeding it. I don't know if I ever left that hallway. I don't know if I ever wanted to. The house is quiet now. Sarah still talks to me, even though I haven't seen her in weeks. But every night at 3:13, I wake up, and the house feels a little fuller. This happened when I was staying with my sister and her daughter in upstate New York. I had just moved in after a long stretch of not speaking to my family. We were trying to patch things up, sharing meals, catching up, pretending things were okay. But there was always this quiet tension in the house, like we were all ignoring something big. Their place had a long backyard that sloped down into a wall of trees. One weekend, my niece Ava was out there playing when she came running back with something in her hands. It was a filthy, stiff little doll, its face cracked, hair matted with dirt. She said she found it sleeping under the tree and she wanted to keep it. I told her maybe she shouldn't be dragging stuff out of the ground, but my sister didn't make a big deal of it. Ava named the doll Maggie and started carrying it everywhere. At dinner, the doll would sit beside her in its own chair. It was weird, but not alarming at first. Things started getting a little off the second night. I woke up to footsteps outside my door, soft ones, like bare feet on wood. I assumed it was Ava going to the bathroom, but when I checked, the hallway was empty. Her door was slightly open, and I saw her in bed, sound asleep. The next morning, she was cranky and quiet. When I asked if she was okay, she said Maggie doesn't like the dark. I thought she was just playing, but there was a strange tone in her voice, too flat, too serious. My sister brushed it off, saying kids get weird ideas sometimes. By midweek, I started noticing cold spots in the house. I'd walk through the hallway and suddenly feel a chill, like a window had been left open, but none were. One night, the temperature dropped so fast in the kitchen that I could see my breath. I didn't tell anyone yet. I was trying not to overthink it. Then came the night I found Ava standing in the living room staring at the wall. It was around 2 a.m. and she didn't even blink when I called her name. I walked up and gently touched her shoulder. She finally turned and whispered, "She's trying to get out." I asked who she meant, and she pointed to the doll, now sitting upright on the windowsill. I hadn't even seen it there before. I picked Ava up and took her back to bed, not saying anything. But the feeling in that room was heavy, like something was watching us. The next morning, Maggie was gone from the windowsill. My sister thought Ava just misplaced it, but she swore she hadn't touched it. We found it later in the hallway closet, facing the corner like it was in time out. No one admitted putting it there. That weekend, I suggested throwing the doll away, but Ava got hysterical. I'd never seen her react like that, screaming, holding Maggie tight like it was a real person. My sister looked shaken too, not by the doll, but by Ava's sudden outburst. She pulled me aside later and said, "She's never acted like that before, not even when her dad left." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear the soft creak of floorboards in the hallway. At one point, I got up and walked through the house, checking every room. I stopped outside Ava's door and heard her whispering like she was having a quiet conversation. But when I gently opened the door, she was asleep, facing the wall, Maggie tucked under her chin. The air in that room felt thick and wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I stepped back and shut the door without going in. Back in my room, I left the light on for the first time since I'd arrived. It felt childish, but I couldn't shake the feeling something unseen had been standing behind me when I was in the hallway. The next day, Ava started asking strange questions. Things like, if someone wants to stay but nobody wants them here, where do they go? Or, can people live in walls? I tried brushing it off as imagination, but my sister was starting to worry too. That night, she asked if I thought the doll could be wrong somehow. We agreed not to say anything in front of Ava, but we both felt it. There was something changing in the house. Lights flickered. The TV turned on with static when no one touched it. A music box in the attic started playing by itself. None of us even remembered owning one. The air felt colder, heavier. On Monday, my sister left for work early, and I was alone in the house. I went into Ava's room to grab laundry, and as I bent down to pick up clothes, I saw something scratched into the wood under her bed. It looked like tiny fingernail marks. 5 lines, over and over, all the way across the floorboards, deep and splintered. I backed out of the room and closed the door, heart pounding. I knew Ava couldn't have done that. Her nails were short and clean, and the scratches were old. Dust settled inside each one. That meant they'd been there a while, maybe even before we found the doll. That night, Ava came into my room holding Maggie. "She says she used to live here," she whispered, "but she was buried because no one listened to her." I didn't respond. I just took her hand and walked her back to bed, but I didn't sleep a second after that. I started looking into the house's past, checking property records and online forums. There was nothing out of the ordinary until I found an old neighborhood post from nearly 20 years ago. It mentioned a little girl going missing. Her name wasn't listed, but the post said, "They never found her, just the doll she always carried." The next morning, I sat Ava down gently and asked her about the doll. She hesitated, looking around the room like someone else might be listening. "Maggie says you're trying to send her away," she finally said. "She doesn't like that." Her tone was calm, but her eyes didn't match. It was like she was repeating something she didn't fully understand. That evening, I heard something dragging across the attic floor again. This time, I went up there with my phone light on, heart hammering. The attic was just as dusty and cluttered as before, but something caught my eye. A small patch of disturbed insulation in the far corner. Underneath it was a wooden floorboard, slightly lifted like it had been opened before. I pried it up carefully and found a hollow space. Inside was a faded pink hair ribbon and the corner of an old torn photo. It showed a little girl holding a doll identical to Maggie. No writing, no date, just wide, frightened eyes staring directly at the camera. I put everything back and closed the attic behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling I'd just disturbed something that was meant to stay hidden. That night, Ava sleepwalked for the first time. I found her standing at the back door, completely still, staring out into the yard. Her hand was pressed flat against the glass. When I touched her shoulder, she blinked, looked at me, and asked, "Did you hear her calling?" I didn't know how to answer. There was no sound, not then. The house grew more unbearable by the hour. Tension buzzed in the walls. The lights dimmed without warning, even during the day. The smell of damp earth filled the hallway near Ava's room. I started keeping her in my room at night, locking the door, not for her safety, but for mine. Something about her had changed, and I couldn't pretend otherwise. 2 days later, I made a decision. When my sister got home from work, I told her we were getting rid of Maggie. No discussion. We waited until Ava was distracted with a movie and then wrapped the doll in an old towel. As soon as we stepped outside, the wind picked up. Clouds moved fast over the house like they were trying to cover something. We buried Maggie in the same place we'd found her, deeper this time. No ceremony, no words, just dirt and silence. That night, the house felt different, still tense, but like something had been cut loose. Ava didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stared at the spot where Maggie used to sit and whispered, "She's still here, just quiet now." I moved out a week later. Ava seemed to go back to normal, or at least she acted like she did. But my sister still swears she hears footsteps in the attic when she's alone. Every so often, she finds small handprints on the windows, even the ones upstairs. Sometimes I wonder if burying Maggie again just made her harder to find, like she sank deeper into the house, into the silence. I don't visit often now. The house never quite feels empty, no matter who's home. Something still watches, waiting, listening.